Good morning, and welcome to Art Basel Conversations. I know it's never easy to get up early in Miami Beach, and it's always hard to come indoors from a beautiful day like we have outside, so it's a great testament to the first artist talk that we have, that you came in so early and on such a beautiful day. As you know, Art Basel Conversations is a long-running series of panels that we've had. We've always started with an artist, because in the end, it always begins with the artists. And we're honored to have this year, for the premiere for the artist talk, Gabriel Orozco, who in a way is an artist who summarizes what's so interesting about Art Basel Miami Beach, about this show, because he on the one hand comes from Mexico, and on the other hand is someone who spent a lot of time both in Europe and in North America. So he bridges the three continents that build this show and build the interest of this show. And we're also delighted to have Michelle Kuo, editor-in-chief of Artforum, to speak with him. I know none of you came to see me talk, so I'm going to get off stage and let them do it. Thanks again for coming out, and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. So maybe I'll just start off and ask you some questions about your recent work, and we thought we would work from the present back to the past in this way, with something that is really fresh in your mind. And those two new series are the Corplegados and the particle paintings. But maybe you just want to talk about the Corplegados first and the kind of process you arrived at to go through producing them.
Well, the Corplegados was a project that I wanted to do during the making of the retrospective exhibition. I was traveling from New York to Basel to Paris and London, and I was very busy doing this big show. And I guess in my generation now we are into this stage of making big retrospectives, or a kind of survey of our middle career in whatever point it is. So that is very heavy in a way. So I wanted to have a project that I could have with me in a more intimate way. And I decided to have these folding papers in my luggage, so I could travel with them, unfold them wherever I was, in a hotel room or in the middle of some whatever, and and they became a kind of maps in which I was drawing and redrawing and pasting things and collaging. So I wonder, should I control this? Sorry to.
Maybe we can show.
Oh yeah. Well, this is before. So let's wait for the other group of works. So anyway, the Corplegados was, I started to make these drawings in 4 years ago. So when I was preparing the exhibition and I was preparing the book, at the same time I was doing these works, and the size of the paper is the size of my body somehow, and when I opened them and I was putting them on the wall and writing on them and doing that, they became a kind of mirror of a situation or a moment, a kind of existential mapping of very intuitive reactions to the environment, to the moment, to whatever was happening around. So at the end, I did 25 that I finished. I have another 20 that are on the go. Some of them, they lasted for 2 years to make. Some of them was just 6 months. Some of them are very complex. They have a lot of layers and a lot of scrabbling and text and texture, and some of them are very simple. So I think that when we make the show at Marian Goodman in September, you could see them as a kind of book, of 4 years of traveling and kind of unconscious thinking, and a very organic display of a kind of open notebook in a way.
Well, one remarkable thing is that they were exhibited between plates of glass protruding out from the wall in certain cases.
Yes.
So you could see the recto and the verso.
Right. Yes, because when I show them in my with friends, it was very nice that you could open them and you could see both sides. You know, you show an object, and that was very nice, I think. And so I thought that was a good idea to show front and back. So we have here in the fair, we have 4 of them, two with Chantal Cruzel and 2 with Marian Goodman, and they are installed in the way that was in the show, so you can open them and see the back, and a little bit like turning the page of a big book. And I think that sometimes is good. I mean, I didn't touch the background. It's always, whatever it is there. And sometimes it has more information, sometimes it's very flat, but not so interesting, let's say. But it's like that. I mean, you know, you when you work on a paper or in any material, there is this back part always that is something you don't control. And all those accidents in the back are always interesting, I think, you know, so.
It's also interesting, you're saying that it had a very direct relationship to your body, and there is a very pronounced symmetry in some cases, also with the cutouts that you make in those works that orient the viewer in a way that is corresponding to your body.
Yes, I decided to, actually it will be very nice, I don't know if we can
show.
Get the images on the CD, but I don't know where they are. It's in the same CD, but there is a chapter of the Corplegados. I don't know if somebody's there. So the...
But also does he have... The relationship between kind of intention and chance is really interesting too, in the sense of what you get on that other surface, on the verso.
Right. So yeah, when you fold the paper and you start to pour ink or painting or something, you start having all these accidents. That's kind of river in a strange topography. And when you unfold that, you have a surprise always. But this folding and unfolding has been important in my work. If you think about from Lades, for example, in a way to cut that car into parallel lines and extract the center is a kind of unfolding the car, and then to fold it again, obviously in a reduced side, but it's a kind of almost like an implosion or an unfolding that makes a new unity. So that movement has been important in a lot of my work. And I think that has to do with the body, because at the end the body is a kind of symmetrical instrument or machine that in the moment of movement and action, you lose that symmetry and you're folding and unfolding. You are in a way absorbing and perceiving, but then you are also opening up things. It's like when you walk, you generate this turbulence. Turbulence is a way of unfolding. It's a kind of unfolding of the surface. So the paper is a surface, and when you start to pour things into it or attack the paper, you start to open it, that surface. So I decided also that because the size of the paper was a little bit like the size of the body, to open up these 2 eyes. So you have always this reference to kind of the double space of crossing the paper, the glance, and the reference to a kind of figurative representation of the body. Some people even say that those drawings are kind of figurative sculpture, which is very interesting, I think, to think that a work on paper can work as a figurative sculpture.
Right.
I wish we have the photos of it. I don't know. I tried to move it here, but it should be in the same disc of the whale, but in a different folder that says Corplegados, maybe.
The other interesting thing is that you had this portability, or that you were carrying them with you in this way as you were traveling.
That was very important, because the other thing that has been for me very important is how sculpture is a vehicle. It's a system of transportation for me in general. So the shoebox is a vehicle, it's a transportation tool, the shoebox. The car, Lades, the plasticine ball that was rolled in the street is a way of also transporting all these imprints and the constant movement of the body in reality. And even skeleton obviously is an animal in movement. So movement, transportation, migration, portability, lightness is important in my work. So for me, sculpture is not a kind of static monument to commemorate something, but more like an instrument of knowledge somehow, or perception of reality. And that also always has to do with a fluctuation of of history, culture, ourselves, in constant change. So I think that for me, has been important to conceive sculpture like that. That's why I think these drawings are more like a sculpture in that sense. Yeah.
It sort of relates to, you had a really wonderful quote about certain types of sculptures you are making that you referred to in terms of topology, and the idea that you could change the shape of something, but in fact the matter and the air, or the mass and the air, stayed the same.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was really an interesting concept to think about in terms of sculpture.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's quite fascinating that in topology, to this idea that every formation can become something else. And again, we can think in the minimum unit, right? And that's why all this idea of the line and the dot and the circle and the idea of atomism has been important to me, is how, in a way, the shape of something or the form is just a momentary stage of anything. That's why it's not so important in a way. Because forms and shapes are just, in a way, just the surface of something. And
well, with the particle paintings, that's an interesting, this other new series, it's almost as if, one way to look at it is as if you have a digital image that we are always resolving digital images that are grids into a seamless image, but it's as if you arrested that moment
Right.
before it totally coheres.
Right.
But maybe you can describe or talk about those works, because it relates to what you were just talking about.
well, you know, I guess after working with photography before, when I was doing my own photographs and interventions, and then photographing those things, and then I started to do the Atomist series, taking photos from the newspapers and applying these circles on top of that. I was trying to figure out the structure of the image, how we perceive it somehow, how it's not just dots, but also a grid that gets into our brain. And so we are perceiving at the same time a dot structure, kind of loose, but at the same time we are always perceiving through a grid. We are perceiving order. So I decided to go into these particle paintings and just taking images from all over the internet, my own photographs, newspapers, TV, and select some of them, from portraits to news to plants and landscapes, and also paintings like Mondrian and Courbet, that two completely different type of paintings. And then transport that into an image first. So I was working with the photograph of these things, not the painting, but the photo of the painting. And then on the other hand, and then after that, transferring that into a program that is called Vector Raster, and it's just that the grid-like, the construction of this image into, at the same time, a dot and a grid. And that makes the perception as sections of color, but also as a very specific structure, very flat, but with the illusion of space and volume somehow. And then on top of that, then I decided to transfer it to painting, so I could somehow manipulate the image. And again, if we think about in the folding and unfolding, we can perceive in the first image how the negative positive space you have in the first grid, you have the dot connected, but then you have the space between the dots. And that space is white, so it's the void, it's the emptiness. So you have positive and negative, again, opening and closing. You have that interspace between things. And the painting that I start to apply onto this is exactly playing with that void feeling of the image. So the image is like almost like it was covered by white noise. So the diamonds in the center, I wish we have the images, but you can see that Kurimansuto, the gallery, they have one of these paintings, so after you should all go there. No, if we don't get the images, you can see it there. It's a World Trade Center image, so you can see the dot application is layer plus layer that is covering in one hand the in-between dots, and changing the color. So it's a way of the construction of the image again. It's like adding filters to the image that we have in our memory. And memory is very important, obviously. When we see something, our memory is playing a role. That's why we can distinguish between trees. If you don't know about trees, all they look kind of the same. Whatever you just see what you understand. So that means that memory is always important in what you see, right? So some of the selection of these images in the particle paintings are based on very memorable images. They are part of our history, like the objects I use in general. But then adding these filters and these grids, you start to distort a little bit. Is it still that image? So topologically speaking, is the same object, but in terms of the addition of time and the deconstruction of the unity, you are adding new elements that obviously play with your memory. And it's not what you thought it was. It's something there new. So you are just basically unfolding memory and folding it again in a new kind of envelope. And this is a continuous thing. So unfold memory is very important. And I think art has to do with that, how you unfold memory in relation with everybody. Its own history and culture is unfolding, you know?
Well, it seems like that is one interesting difference from, let's say, Seurat or Liechtenstein, who were following explicitly either proto-scientific theories of color mixing, of optical mixing, or of a mechanical system like the Ben-Day dot. But this introduces a sort of subjective dimension of memory into your perception of this otherwise very gridded or mechanical structure.
Yeah, yes. I mean, if you see the subjects of, let's say, the antecedents of pointillism and dot-based paintings, you have, Seurat is very much like out of reality, still impressionism, the landscape, the very real thing that you have in front. And through a scientific kind of system, you try to perceive that and make it into a kind of rule somehow, so how perception is deconstructed. And then in Liechtenstein is more about the the American culture, and it's taking a lot from TV and although he has for sure many things related with art practice, and we all know the Picasso-like paintings and all that, but it's very much like about just the representation in a very basic way of and obviously coming from the offset printing. Offset is very different than today digital printing.
Right.
The dot system that you have if you see the posters before, the dots were more like in kind of units, and overlapping dots is what you have, and that's what they use. I mean, Warhol, Liechtenstein, and everybody in the 70s, 60s, and 70s. But today, printing is not the same. It's obviously pixels. Is a different particular structure. So it's not the same. So that's why for me the grid was very important. It's not overlapping like this, but it comes from a very flat system of printing the image, and then it's more influenced by the internet in any case, right? So Seurat was influenced by photography. I say, of course, that we all know the beginning of the century is that first impact in painting was photography, and in the 60s and 70s is television, and today is the computer world, So.
Well, you seem always to be interested in adopting or exploring new materials and different kinds of processes as well, and maybe you can talk about that. I don't know, that's an interesting, for instance, working with digital images and actually very high production fabrication versus, on the other hand, some of the very ephemeral, low, or quotidian materials that you've used in many of your works. And you run that gamut, much more widely than a lot of other artists.
Well, yeah, I try to do that from the beginning. I mean, sometimes I'm surprised when some people comment that today I'm doing more like big works or highly produced works, or and before that was more like everything was ephemeral and
Right.
small and whatever. I mean, I'm very surprised because it's not true. I mean,
Right.
the same year that I made, for example, I showed the shoebox in Venice, just the empty shoebox, or I put the oranges in the windows at MoMA. That same year I did La Déesse with a car coated in two. And that car is high production. I mean, it's a car, it's cutting up, you need technology, you need instruments, you need to produce this piece. It was not expensive, but I'm saying in the level of manufacture, in the time of production, is of course somehow a highly produced piece compared with a shoebox.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the elevator, and I mean, always in my work I think it has to do a lot with the play in the scale of the body in action.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the unfolding of the scale of production and perception and human body into the landscape, micro, macro, how you are moving and transforming small things and big things. So for me, that has been always important. That's why I need to move between this range of scales, and I like to do small actions, ephemeral actions, but I also have to go to more kind of big pieces, like the whale that was made for the library in Mexico, but still doing all collecting things in the street, encountering objects, but then transforming them has to play with the scale of perception always. And has been that for, like, I have been doing that every year every year I do that. I change scale all the time. And it's just that you need, I guess for me, is the way of research. You have, for example, the first image here was all the atomists. Oh, now it doesn't work. Well, sorry for the slide presentation. We try to.
Oh, and maybe you go back.
I
Press
did-
the
I
red.
did that.
Oh. But but we can talk about the skeleton if you like to. I mean, the thing that's interesting also is combining with the recent survey, then combining all of those different works together in some configuration, thinking about how to display them
Right.
in concert with each other, and maybe you can talk about that.
Yes, well, that was one of the challenges of the retrospective show, how to exactly put together this variety of works into one traveling tour, because it was not just like one show in one museum, it was in 3 different spaces, 4, and very different. So it was very challenging that, how to connect this work, balance the scales between them. It was challenging. What I try to do is that in every space, I think that a lot of my work is site-specific, so it was made in a very specific circumstance, like in a specific country for a specific situation. And some of them, the majority, they are also made to work afterward. So it's very important for me that they are not just for that situation, but that when you transport them somewhere else, they bring with them that meaning, and start to interact in a new context. I think that is very important, but it's about migration. So there is, it's not about locality just like that, because at the end, perception of the object, even inside specific situation, is going to be local depending on who is perceiving it. So then you bring it out and starts to interact with new situations. And for me, that was always very important. I use photography sometimes, but I was even more interested in the object itself, to bring it out and expose it. So, and then when you have this retrospective show, the problem is that you have to put together an accumulation of time. So that is a factor that is make it even more complicated. So you have the physical spaces, the scale, but then you have the time that is accumulated in all these objects and how you make that time happen, chronologically or a kind of cycle, or connections of kind of absurdity, or by colors, or by subjects, animals here, cars here, shoeboxes here. So you see, you can organize a retrospective in so many ways. For me, I always like the idea of the kind of, I think an artist has to, in a way, generate a kind of cosmos, you know, a kind of solar system, or a kind of astrological map somehow, and not in a metaphysical way, but you generate every work you make has to have it works as a kind of planet in a system that is in rotation and in constant movement, and is interconnecting and has gravity. And some works, they attract other works or produce other works, and when you collide some works, they produce new planets and new works. And that is somehow how I think the brain works, how at least I try to work my brain. So one work, big or small, generates another or many other works. And in a show, it's important to try to represent that constellation of works and how they are interacting. And obviously there are pieces that they are more like heavy solar gravity stars, and they are stars. And there are others that are more like satellites, and they are just floating around things. So, but if you think in a retrospective as a kind of solar system or something, you have to form it like that. And when every work is different, in my case, the variety is quite big. Sometimes the connections are not so evident. So for me, it was important in this show to put together this, so the variety, to put the S next to the shoebox was important. Why this artist was doing that and that the same year.
Do you want to describe the shoebox for people
shoebox?
may not all know.
You describe the shoebox.
What? No, this is about you. It's about you. I would not. Yeah, you. I think it would be interesting if you talked about how you.
What was the word? The shoebox? It was in the slides. No, I'm joking. Well, just for the ones who don't know, the shoebox. I just a shoebox is a shoebox, regular white shoebox, and I put it in. Oh yeah, we start.
Oh wow.
Let's start all over again.
That's not the shoebox, but that's great.
So just I display a shoebox in Venice Biennial in '93 in my little booth in the Corderie del Arsenal. Was my first show in a kind of group show, important group show, international and etc. in '93. And when I was there, I saw these booths one after the other, and it was such a long corridor, and I felt like I was in a kind of, I don't know. And I thought that displaying the shoebox was the right gesture for that environment, for that situation, for me, in the terms of the sculpture I like. So the only thing I did is to place the shoebox, take out the top and put it on the bottom, and it was open there in the floor. Why do you want me to describe the shoebox?
Well, we're talking about it, and so for people who might not know what the work was,
okay.
It makes more sense when you're talking about putting these things together. But I think that was the other interesting question about
unfolding, folding, unfolding.
Yeah,
so
exactly. Yes, we can start from the end. This is a corp legato.
Okay, let me see if this works, because I want to just. Oh yeah. Okay, so let's see. Let's go back to this and we round up the conversation. If you want. No.
It's up to you.
No, it's up to you.
It's up to you. No, please.
Well, we go
ahead.
quickly. So this is the front and the back of the pieces, just for you to know. So this is the back. So you see all the tape and all the kind of work. When I cut and paste, I paste it in the back. So I touch the back, but just when I put tape and all that. And then in the front, you can see the foldings. Not too fast. Okay. Okay. Yes. And then you can see.
We haven't talked about
the
time yet.
lines That I didn't do. So, okay, I just remove it. So you can see the foldings. It's a little bit like in my notebooks. That also they have been very important in my work. These notebooks in which I paste and take notes, and the idea of not having a studio, because I change all the time materials, so I didn't need a particular studio with specific tools. So I was changing the way of working all the time. So the notebook became the very important archival and experimental space for my thinking. And this the scale you can see on the top is the eyes kind of cut on the margins and in the center. So the size is a little bit like 180 or 2 meters by 1 meter. And when they fold, they became like this. So they can easily fit in a luggage. And then you see the pouring, they become a kind of map. It's very maybe confusing somehow if you see them as a unity. This has, photographs of another piece I did with flies in clay. My hands always present in my work also. So there's always something, a body that is interacting with the surface. So yeah, I'm glad we can see them a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
So then you don't have to go to the fair. You can just go home. Okay, next. No, next question.
Well, to go back to the survey exhibition, it is interesting to think about, to have something that, in other words, with your work, you've provoked, let's say, a reaction or even maybe shock in the viewer with both the very large scale and the very small or diminutive, precisely because it was so diminutive, or like the yogurt caps, for example. And that, I guess, would be the question as to, in a retrospective survey, how you kind of, do you even want to recapture that same experience for the spectator, or is it irrevocably lost because it relied on that surprise or even disappointment that maybe can't be replicated in perpetuity? But I don't know.
Well, it's a very good point, because when you add time to in a retrospective that we already say, we have the objects, so you have different bodies, different spaces, they collapse, but then you have collapsing into one as a kind of black hole.
Right.
So it's easy. I think that obviously the surprise is lost in many ways, the original surprise of the first day. But I think that it doesn't matter, because you have, if the work, the meaning, and that's why it's very important, it's not just like a surprise work or a joke work. Mm-hmm. The meaning of the piece, the way it's built, mm-hmm. the way it was displayed, mm-hmm. the gesture, mm-hmm. it has meaning, and it still has relevance mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. in present time. Mm-hmm. You can use it because it's an instrument. Art is an instrument, I think. So the yogurt cups they were instruments to raise consciousness about that situation in particular, in all levels, not just spatial, but also political,
right.
aesthetical, temporal, existential. So all those levels, if the work still has, and independently of me and the original, the origin of the work, just as a piece, mm-hmm. has the potential of that meaning, it will be again as surprised and as disappointed as it was the first time you show it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And somehow we can kind of see, and the artist especially can see, when the work has still some power or relevance mm-hmm. or life. Mm-hmm. And you can also see when it's dead, and mm-hmm. you say, well, this guy was very nice to meet him, this work, and make them, but it's just like, it was nice, but now not anymore. I think you can see that, and mm-hmm. you have to play with those elements, because nobody knows how long is going to last the meaning of a work. Mm-hmm. And it has nothing to do with the material. that is lasts longer than others. I mean, it can be a cardboard shoebox and probably lasts longer than a bronze if the bronze is not so meaningful.
Right.
So I think that has to do with the relevance of the idea and the whole the way the work is conceived and made, and then still can produce some kind of surprise and shock. And then when you put together things that they were disconnected, and suddenly you make new associations. And for me that was important. It's not just the artist as a kind of interventionist in different sporadic, dispersed situations, but that at the same time this artist is creating a kind of universe or a kind of system that has its own orbits, gravities, connections, that they need each other. So it's a kind of ecosystem also. So it's not just that a work that breathes and lives depending on the art world, not just, or reality or politics, not just. It really on its own starts to be self-sufficient. And that is what you can prove, and you can check for yourself and test the work in a retrospective show. If that work is an ecosystem, is self-sufficient, and justify the person who is making these things to keep working, whatever happens afterwards. So in my case, if it is clear that I'm not going to repeat myself, that I'm not going to do the same as I did before, that I'm going to keep changing materials, that I'm going to be disappointing people and maybe surprise people, I think in a retrospective show you have to settle those elements somehow as a platform, so you can keep just working as you have been doing it before. You know? So, and sometimes it doesn't work. A retrospective is a killer, and it looks like actually that cell or that system is imploding or collapsing or is not self-sufficient. And it was depending on the art world, on the art market or things, but just in one or two things, and then at the end it's not self-sufficient. And I think that is why retrospectives are very, stressful for the artist.
Tricky.
Tricky.
I don't know at this point if we want to take
Yeah,
questions.
sure.
Or
Let's take questions. Don't ask me to have more slides.
You have a folder of the particle paintings too, though, probably? Or?
Yeah, maybe. So the backs and the front in order always.
There's someone.
That's a question?
Excuse me. I think they're going to bring a microphone to you somehow.
Over there. Oh.
And we were asked to ask you if you could just say who you are, why you're here.
Well, my name is Maximiliano Signani. I have a question about your games, your pieces, how you define as an art piece, not a game.
How I define as art, the game or the piece or what I do?
Yeah, about your game, your art pieces as a game.
Well, I will never try to do that. I mean, to define as art. I think it's more like how a game can become an artistic experience or an aesthetic experience or a poetic experience or a political experience or a special experience. So how you just transform, again, memory and certain rules in a game that can be a board game or a field game that they already were created in representation of structures of organization of the universe. That means every game in every culture has the games, board games or field games, they are representations of that culture, conception of the universe, the calendar, the landscape. And that's the way you represent that into games. So game is already something quite complex. It's not just like a game. Calling it games because they're entertaining. But the good games are very complex structures of thinking. Even soccer, huh? So, believe it or not, you have to think about it. You just have to be very fast to think about it. But So I think that then, games, when I start to manipulate some games, that I was trying to play with the memory that we do have about those games. So the ping pong table one was open into 4, generating this empty space in the center. Then I had to decide what to do with this new kind of space. And I decided to make a pond, but it could be a rock, could be sand, could be nothing. And the moment you add this pond and you start to play with it, and the ball falls in the water, you will have a suspense in time. You are playing with the time of the action of the piece. The billiard table, when you have this third ball hanging and starts to float out of the table, you start to address the kind of suspension in time and space of the memory you have about the game, and then you need to relearn how to use your body to play it. So in a way, it's not that I was thinking in art when I was doing this. I was thinking in time, I was thinking in phenomena, very basic things as gravity, the body in action, erosion, things that I think in my sculpture in general. I think after when I finish a piece, maybe I don't know if it's art or not. It's not that the question I'm asking, So, thank you. Next.
There's a few more hands in this area. I think standing right next to you.
Yeah, I just want to, Paul the Marquis from New York, I just want to keep on that. Do you think that the context of your art piece is based on the games? If the games were in, for example, a toy room or something for kids, or in a museum, do you think the experience would be different?
No.
Be the same?
I think so.
Do you think it influence how it's called art or not? Do you think maybe we call it art because it's in a gallery or museum? Or if it was, for example, in the game room, it'd just be a toy?
Well, you see, what many artists do, and I found it horrible, is that they reproduce kind of curious displays in Museum of Natural History or archaeology museums or something like that. And those type of museographical displays or games, they are bringing to the art world. That we have seen in many artists. So play with let's say, the language of the display and games and installations in other type of museums, scientific, etc. They bring in it. And somehow in the art world, they have a kind of immediate effect of kind of amusement. So you see something, but then you think, but I saw this one in the Museum of Natural History, and it's okay. And then you think what you are saying. So I think the first question to ask is why that doesn't work so well. What else you need to do to transport a game or an installation display or a museographical strategy from one world into the art world? What else you need? Some people believe, and I don't like to say the word, but some people believe that there is something called the poetic. So when you achieve some moment that looks like poetical, you are accessing a world that is not the technological world, the scientific world, game world. You are into a world of poetics. Let's take that seriously and believe that, philosophically speaking, in terms of language or in terms of perception of reality, in terms of your awareness of time, culture, etc., you gain in that game some knowledge about something. You learn something. You have also some kind of emotional impact that makes you feel the poetic is happening. And then also you have to think, like, if, for kids it's different. I don't know but for the kids will be the poetic. So if you put it in a kid's room, if you put my chessboard with the horses in a kid's room, obviously they will destroy it. It will be the most boring game. But kids always destroy my work in general. So I remember I was in the beach, I was making sand balls and putting them in the stones, and I was taking pictures, and for me they looked so beautiful. And for me it was nice intervention with the found objects. The oranges in the tables in Cachoeira, for me, I was having fun. I was having fun, and I thought that was nice. But kids arrive and they start to crash my balls with other balls, and they start to take out the oranges and pile it up and take it out. So they make their own game, which is fine. But I was playing first, and it's my game. And I needed to make some money, by the way. No, I'm joking. So you see the game after game. I mean, it's very. But let's say that my games are kind of boring, and I think they are disappointing in a way. So they don't have, let's say, the dynamic of a regular billiard game or a ping pong game or a chess game. They don't have the regular dynamic. They have another dynamic, which is slowing down, impasse, define some kind of perception, known perception of gravity in relation with the memory of that object. So I am manipulating the perception of the game itself, the way you play it. It can be boring in many ways, but it's not boring. It's just a different type of entertainment, let's say, that has to do more with maybe philosophy. If you don't like philosophy, you will not like these objects. If you don't like poetic or, let's say, poetry, you will not like them. So I think that obviously for kids in a child game, probably they will not like philosophy and poetics at this point, which I understand, and found it very boring. But I don't think art is for kids.
I think there's another one.
Gracias.
Last question, Millennial from Mexico City. I wonder, how was the weather the day you found the whale it's hanging in that library in Mexico City? I read, you found this in Baja California Sur. Briefly, what is the story behind the momentum when you found this whale in a beach? Is that how it happened, or just to make the record about this piece?
About the whale?
Yeah.
Well, yes, I did. But it's not that I found them. I looked for it. I was, when I have the idea to make this whale for the National Library in Mexico that was in construction, and I got this idea. I said, okay, let's do it. Then we have to set an expedition team to look for the bones of this whale. And as you know, the whales are protected, so you cannot just. There is not a market for whale bones. You are not just found them in the beach like that. And even if you find them in a beach, you cannot just take them in your car. They are protected in Mexico, so they belong to the government, they belong to the people. It's a federal property. But because the National Library was also federal property and a government project, it was just a matter of transporting from one place to the other place. I didn't charge for the object. I charged honorariums for my labor in doing this. I was an employee in a way. So I was not even, the price was not the regular price of an artwork, it was different. So then we set an expedition of 6 people. I went with other 4. One was an expert, and we went to a sanctuary in Baja California that is known and is a protected area, very big. It's like 34 miles of sand. It's called Isla de Arena, Sand Island. And all the whales come there to die, but also to procreate. So it's a migration that comes from the north and comes down to Baja California, and it's a touristic place. People look at the whales in the ocean and all that, but some of them obviously they die there, and this area is protected because to avoid the trafficking of the bones and all that. So talking obviously with Semarnat and Profepa and all that, we set an expedition to look for this complete skeleton we need. And it was a very nice experience. It's like going to the moon. So it's all this sand and miles of sand, and then big whales just lying there, recently dead, like 2 weeks dead. Some more, like 1 year dead. I was looking for a 2-year dead skeleton, so it still was together. Because when after 2 years, the bones just starts to disperse. They just, and then they disappear eventually after many years. So we found this 2-year whale, and we take out every bone out. So it was kind of archaeological labor, catalog everything, transport it, and then reassemble, clean it. I mean, it was a whole operation, like if I was working for the Museum of Natural History, to have this complete whale skeleton. And then end up in the library, which I think is just, like a way of having a real object from nature in a institution that is made for knowledge. So for me, it was important that it's not just decorative art or something like that, but has to do with, like when you have in some buildings that you have instruments, you have specimens, you have things for knowledge. So knowledge, instruments. That sounds very serious, huh?
It is we've been
And
very
then
serious
games.
today.
Ah, my goodness.
Is that?
Well, you have to work, everybody, no? It's opening. No, I'm joking. Please.
You're talking about serious. I'm going to ask a question that can be quite serious.
Oh, yes?
Hi. Yes, I'm Cecilia Wong. I write about science and the arts. And you talk about painting as being an unfolding of memory. And of course, right now, biology and neuroscience talk a lot about unfolding of memory and the visual arts. Do you think that your work and the neuroscience should run parallel, or would they destroy each other if they intersect? I'm sorry.
No, what do you think? Well, give me more hints. In what sense?
You do your work and you talk about the unfolding of memory, which is very, very true. That's what they are saying now.
Uh-huh.
How we take in visual images and how we interpret it and how we would read is always bringing out something in the memory to guess what it is. And it's a play between the eye and the brain. That, okay, I think this is about art. But if the word art Basel conversations are totally foreign to me,
Okay.
I would have a difficult time reading it.
Put your microphone a bit closer.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
So, do you read about what's happening now in neuroscience?
Normally, not so
Okay.
much. Not specifically neuroscience, but I always try to be informed about things.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So you are kind of intersecting.
Well, yeah, I think I'm very old-fashioned in that sense. I think as an artist, so I do believe like every universe that we are trying to create in terms of language and in terms of our world has to have some degree of geometry, some degree of scientific data, or at least testing science or perception of science in relation with reality, gravity, fluctuations, collisions, and also philosophy. So I try to read a little bit of this and that, because that gives me ideas for work. So the atom is, for example, the structure with the circles and the atom is that at the beginning I was trying to, I was thinking in two things. In one hand, the idea of the chain, the kind of DNA chain, how it develops and grows. And I was thinking, okay, let's represent a kind of DNA of minimum units and invent a possible way of growing of this chain to develop into something else. Obviously, it's related with fractals. But I not into full kind of playing the scientist. So I think I like also to have some distance from this, to take it as a kind of another way of gaming with knowledge and reality. So I'm a little bit skeptical too of complete science art, but it's obviously fascinating, and I think that if we are pretending to create a kind of personal universe with all the different elements, we have to play with the laws of science. We have to understand them a little bit. We have to be aware of that. But it's very old-fashioned what I'm saying, because many artists probably they don't care so much about these things.
But when you're talking about art as being in an ecosystem,
Yeah.
Okay.
It's okay.
When
one
art
more.
is being in inside the ecosystem,
Yes.
that means it must conform to the gravity or whatever, gravitation force, particle force.
It does.
Right,
Gravitation
okay.
for sure.
That's the kind of art that will be remembered.
Sorry?
That's the kind of art that will be remembered.
Well, I think that we can definitely think in a kind of ecology in art too.
Yeah.
And we can also think in global warming or phenomena that are kind of new and exotic and strange. So if we can always compare that. It's not the only way to do things, of course. I don't believe in this kind of biological animal comparison. But definitely I think the art world is an ecosystem. and can be fragile and has behavior that we can compare with the behavior of the natural world, you know. And I think that every artist has its own ecosystem, and some of them are self-sufficient, some of them are too dependent on the art world or some institutions. And if you think in those terms, you can analyze many stories and many developments in different artists and what survives and what doesn't survive. And it starts from the beginning, how the work is produced, how the artist is facing reality, how you are understanding your world, your situation, yourself, and how you are developing with facts, not just with speculation, but facts and truths, let's say, provisional truths. But you have to be sure that when you do a work, it somehow is truth, it's believable, it works. So the plastic symbol, when it's rolled in the street, is because when it's getting all the imprints and all the dust and all that in terms of time, is a fact. It's out of an aesthetic judgment. It's a fact. It works like that. A sculpture has to work. And it's not about performing a kind of theatrical illusion. It's not about, for me at least, it's not about the illusion of something that is not real, but is a kind of nice idea, but it's not real. For me, it has to be real, has to work as an instrument in reality. And in that sense, you need to think a little bit like a scientist, a little bit like an engineer, a little bit like a biologist. And that's the logic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, welcome. So that's
Thank
it, I think.
you.
No? Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you.